When we compare slopes of a function and its inverse, we can generalize that in general, the slope of the inverse function is going to be the reciprocal of the slope of the original function. So here's the slope of the inverse, there's the slope of the original. Okay, so why is this the case? So let's take a look at a graph f. So this graph here is f, and that makes the inverse function this blue graph here. And if we take a look at the inverse coordinates, okay, the inverse coordinates, this coordinate at the slope calculated at A is the inverse of the slope, not the inverse, the reciprocal of the slope calculated here at B. Okay, and we can see that this rise and run is going to have this change of x, change of y. This rise and run is going to have a change of x, change in y, and the nature of inverse, the x properties switch with the y properties switch with the x properties. Okay, so that's a way we can justify this relationship. So when we say that the derivative of f is going to be the change in y over the change in x, the derivative of the inverse function should be just the reciprocal. We're just going to flip that slope. Okay, and we can see that due to the symmetry of the graph and its inverse, that is always going to be true. Now note that the slope at A is not the reciprocal, and the slope at B here is not the reciprocal, but the slope of these corresponding inverse coordinates are reciprocals. So let's say we have f of x, that's my orange graph, and then the inverse is the blue graph. We have f of a equals b. Okay, so if we can just keep track of our inputs and outputs. So there's my input, A, my output is B for the f graph. If I then say the inverse is my g graph, this blue graph then represents the inverse. Okay, so the g of x represents, this is same as the inverse of x. In this case, my input will be b, and my output will be A. So when I calculate slope here, I need to have an input. So f prime, I have to use A. Okay, in this case here, for the input, so this will give me slope. And for the slope on the blue graph, the input is going to be not A, but the output of f, which is B. So if I want to find the g slope to g prime, I have to use b. Okay? And this would be the reciprocal of the slope that I got here. Okay? So, but I have to keep track of my inputs and outputs. To calculate slope here, I'd use a. To calculate slope here, I have to use the output of f, which is b.